This is the Russini Report. With the Athletic's senior NFL insider, Dianna Russini.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me today is the Athletic's NFL insider, Dianna Russini. Dianna, how are you?
I'm good. It's one of those days where you wake up, you think it's going to be quiet, but oh no, it's that time of year, Robert. So, right as we are a few days here from Thanksgiving, teams start going, what are we? Who do we want to be? And do we need to start making some changes here as we're getting really close, obviously, here to the end of the season and the playoffs? So we'll start with some news actually coming out of Indy. A little surprising, too. This just happened about 10 minutes ago. Shaquille Leonard posted on Twitter a goodbye letter to Indy, and sources have confirmed to us being James Boyd, our beat reporter for the Colts for The Athletic, that they have waived him. They've moved on from him. And that does come as a surprise, just understanding what he has meant to this organization and obviously the caliber of player he has been over the years. But we know, he's dealt with lots of injuries. And sometimes that, you could see that there was some of that in his game, still some hesitancy, knowing that is something that he's had to be, he's really had to deal with and has become a challenge for him in order for him to just, play that position. So really some surprising news coming out of Indy.
Yeah, the entire saga with him, I think, is really a symbol that we've had a changing of the guard in Indianapolis, right? You have the previous regime that is kind of rooted in that draft, which was Shaq Leonard, Braden Smith, Quentin Nelson, and that was kind of that group that they hit on early on, and all those guys got extensions, and that was really kind of the bedrock of the Chris Ballard era there for a while. The new coaching staff comes in, he falls out of the rotation, and now with this move, it really does feel like we've kind of turned a page with what the Colts are. I'm curious how the finances of this work out. He had a pretty big contracts that he was still playing on. The dead money hit is still pretty significant, but I feel like this was kind of coming, but it still seems like a drastic departure from what we understood the Colts to be here over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so he'd still be owed, a little bit more than $6 million if a team were to sign him. He, of course, will hit waivers now. Right before we were starting the show here, I reached out to some teams that I know we're sniffing around that linebacker market, right before the trade deadline. And I do think he'll get some interest. I did have one source right back, like expensive, right? Because it's going to cost a team a lot if they're going to want to bring him on. And he isn't the same player that he was. And this isn't to take away from the caliber of player that he has been since 2018 in Indy, the type of energy he's brought to that defense, to that locker room. He is such a significant part of the Colts for years. But I believe that he probably wants to continue playing, but we'll just have to see if another team jumps in here and picks up. Based on his statement, it didn't sound like that was it from a football standpoint. It just sounds like his time in Indy has just come to an end.
Let's keep rolling with today's news, something that came down this morning.
Yeah.
Pretty big bombshell in the coaching world, and it's something I think had been brewing for a little while. The Steelers move on from offensive coordinator Matt Canada, fired a little more than halfway through his third season at the helm. It seems like they're going to tag team the play calling duties moving forward. And this is something that the Steelers fan base was crowing for a while now based on the performance of their offense. And it felt like that game against the Browns last week was sort of the last straw. And this is very out of character for this organization. The first in-season coach firing in, I think, more than 80 years, which speaks to the stability that organization has been able to enjoy. But a shock in that regard, but not a shock when you consider the results and the production on the field from the Steelers offense.
Yeah, and you could see that it was wearing on the defense, right? It's like, how much can they hold any longer with the way this offense has been strung together the last few weeks? And, I do want to get your thoughts on how you think this offense has looked under Matt Canada, but let me just take you inside what I've been told over the past few weeks in regards to his job status. Before the bye week, when I was talking to Pittsburgh, when the screams and cries from the fans were starting to really get loud, it was, it made sense if the Pittsburgh Steelers, despite the fact that they haven't made a coaching move since 1941, that maybe this is something that they would consider. And I just kept getting told the same thing, which is we don't do that. We're not doing that. That's outside of our model of what we believe in. And I take their word for it, and their history proves that. They don't step outside that model. And I was also told after the bye week when I checked back in that if a move were to be made, it would be made right after that bye. So obviously we're way past that now. And here we are at the end of November, and they've moved on. And Mike Tomlin spoke at length today. You didn't even really need to listen to his words. You could physically just see him that he feels relief, I believe, that there's going to be change here, and there needs to be change. You know, he had some great lines in his press conference, but perhaps the most simple, basic thing he said that really tells you a lot, which is you need to score touchdowns in this game, right? And that is just where they have struggled. And obviously the offense isn't that simple, and there needs to be significant changes here for them to be productive. But I think this really comes down to the fact that we've been sitting here trying to figure out, is it the quarterback? Is it the play caller? Well, the Steelers right now, they believe it was the play caller. So now they're going to hand those over. It's going to be sort of like a duo of coaches here that are going to be part of their offense.
You can't fire the quarterback a season and a half after drafting him in the first round. It's much easier to fire the play caller, even if that's out of character for this organization in particular. What changed? Because this has been an ongoing problem. There are people calling for his job this offseason, and it's been rough over the first half of the year. I mean, this team was in the bottom 5, bottom 3 in the league for the first half of the season in offensive success rate. What do you think was the tipping point here in the decision to move on from Matt Canada?
Yeah, I had somebody close to the Steelers share with me over the phone this afternoon that when the locker room started talking a lot more about their frustrations among each other, that started to really alert everyone in this organization. Mike Tomlin has always been a player-friendly coach, yet also very disciplined, also coach-friendly and patient. Probably one of the most patient head coaches. But from the conversation I had, it seems that he sensed that there could be bigger problems. And you and I discussed some of the things that we even saw over the last week or so, whether it was in the halls of the stadium, whether it was on social media. The frustrations here from the Steelers on both sides of the ball were starting to build. And I think this organization realized, sort of the way we saw in Buffalo, perhaps what we're seeing in New York with just the quarterback change, that something needs to be different here in order for us to get the best out of everybody. And Matt Canada was it today.
That all makes sense. And I think that they were justified in moving on from him. My only problem with this is if you listen to Mike Tomlin during that press conference, it sounds like he just learned that this was an issue like 2 weeks ago and he's just become fed up with it. We're in year 3 of this. And I just think that the way that they've handled the entire kind of plan with their offense, the plan for why their offensive coordinator was who it was, has been misguided. You know, Matt Canada was the quarterback coach in Ben Roethlisberger's last season there when Randy Fichtner was the offensive coordinator. Randy was Ben's longtime quarterbacks coach going back years and years and years. They promoted Randy, I think, probably to appease Roethlisberger late in his career. They fire him as Roethlisberger gets toward the end. They promote Matt Canada because I guess he was in the building after how many failed stints that he had as a college offensive coordinator. And then after Ben Roethlisberger moves on, they draft a quarterback in the first round. And rather than saying, listen, we probably should really consider what our plan is going to be here. We drafted this guy in the first round of the NFL draft. If you look around the league and you look at how thoughtful and considered the plans that successful teams have for their coordinators and what they look like, that is a big departure from just promoting Matt Canada from being the quarterback's coach just because he was in the building. So I just think every single step of this has been misguided when it comes to being thoughtful about how to build your offense, how to lead your offense, and how to set your young quarterback up to succeed. There's a very good chance that Kenny Pickett just ain't it, but this still doesn't excuse the lack of urgency and the inertia that kind of takes over here. To an extent, it reminds me of what happened in New England, where sometimes these coaches, these organizations, whether it be Bill Belichick and Mike Tomlin, make these decisions and just think, well, we're the Steelers, we'll figure it out, or we're the Patriots, we'll figure it out. That's not going to fly. Not in a world where Mike McDaniel and Kyle Shanahan and some of these guys exist. And we did 3 years of this in Pittsburgh. If I'm a Steelers fan and I look at a TJ Watt, a Cam Hayward, some of the talent we have on the roster, I would think that they threw some of that time away. And that's incredibly frustrating, whether you're a player in that building or whether or not you're a fan of that team.
The talent is certainly better than the result. And I'm not saying that this is a roster that was just popping off the screen of, oh my gosh, look at these players. They're so good. How are they not getting more? Matt Canada is just that bad. But the philosophy of building and hiring within, I think actually has way more tentacles than what it appears to the fans at times. Because anytime I've talked to GMs and head coaches that have done this, in their world, there is a language and an understanding in their specific organization that they believe and feel only those that speak it can get it and learn it quickly and be part of it and be productive quickly. So I understand the idea of why Mike Tomlin would keep somebody that has been part of the Steeler way, who gets how they operate, who gets why they do things, the type of character that they believe in, what the expectations. Because when you do bring in an outsider, you spend a lot of time trying to teach them up on how you do things, because so many people have so many different examples and experiences. I remember when in college, I applied for my first job as a waitress, and I got the job over like all these servers. And I remember thinking, like, why the heck did I get it? I'm not going to be very good. I've never done this. And the manager of the store said, well, I can shape you. I can make you the waitress I want you to be. All these other guys have experience from other places. And it's very similar, right? It's like, I understand, what we know. With that being said, I do think the strongest part of what you bring up is Mike Tomlin holds his players accountable and he holds himself accountable. And I was surprised he didn't share in the press conference today any responsibility in this. It was, I need to see this, I need to see that. At the end of the day, the head coach has a big hand, or must have a big hand, in every decision and everything that is happening on the field. So I agree with you in Mike Tomlin needs to take some responsibility here in not just allowing this season, but perhaps for the last 3 years.
What he said during that press conference was, this decision is mine and mine alone. What was the decision to hire him originally? Yours and yours alone? Was the decision to retain him yours and yours alone? Because there is some culpability on Mike Tomlin's side of this here. And I think it's really important when you consider the way the last couple of years have gone and how bad that offense has looked and the lack of urgency they've had to fix it. I even make a comparison to what happened in the division this offseason. They played out the string with Greg Roman in Baltimore, and Greg Roman's heights were high in Baltimore. Lamar Jackson won an MVP award 4 years ago, but they understood that they needed to make a change. They went out, showed some urgency, some aggressiveness in going out to hire a guy like Todd Monken, because in this league right now, you got to fight fire with fire on offense. It can't just be good enough. You can't just hope we can patch it together and be fine offensively, because I think if that's your mindset, if you're shooting for the middle, you're often going to fall short of that. And even that isn't good enough. And I think that's what the Steelers have been dealing with.
Robert, when I was at the owners meeting and I was talking to a bunch of different GMs and head coaches about what Baltimore was doing, when you brought up Greg Roman there, I kept saying, who did you think Baltimore should have went with? Who should Baltimore hire after Greg Roman? And almost every conversation I had with every person was, they should hire Greg Roman. Right? Because everyone felt that he brought the best out of Lamar, yet look what we're seeing now. And look, we could talk another day about what we've seen different in Baltimore, not just from the play calling aspect, obviously the roster here and what they've done here and how they've changed their look a bit. But I think the fact that this organization, and credit to them, had the vision to understand that this, even though he's ours, isn't going to get it done. And it's comfortable, but we may have to go a little uncomfortable and outside the box here to get the best out of our quarterback. And I think that's what Pittsburgh, for now, until they figure out what they're going to do for next season.
It sounds like Mike Sullivan, their quarterback's coach, and their running backs coach are going to kind of tag team this thing. We'll see what happens after the season ends.
Yep.
What sort of solution they have, how Kenny Pickett fits into that solution. Those are reasonable questions. How much the quarterback is to blame for this? Is he fixable? Who should be the guy to do it? But I think you can ask all of those questions while also acknowledging that the way that they handled this over the last couple of years was a misstep. It was a huge misstep and a huge miscalculation that I think really affected the franchise in a negative way. All right, let's get to some of the other hot seat potential coaches in the league and monitor some of those situations. Let's start in Carolina. You said on this show last week that it really did seem like there needed to be significant improvements from that staff, especially on offense, for this group to keep their jobs moving forward into next season. How hot is Frank Reich's seat right now in Carolina after another pretty awful showing against the Cowboys on Sunday?
Yeah, this is a staff that is walking on eggshells right now in that building. They are well aware that ownership is not happy with what has been on the field. We know that Frank Reich went back to taking over the play calling here, and it didn't get any better. There was no spark. There was no shot in the arm. There was no improvement. And when
I was concerned for Bryce Young, like concerned for him during that game. And that is not a good feeling to have when your head coach takes back over the play calling duties.
And when the head coach's philosophy, which is shared among most head coaches when you have a rookie quarterback, that the number one priority is to keep your quarterback healthy and to make sure that he's not getting injured. Yet there were many moments, I think we were all holding our breath a little bit of this protection is so bad he's going to get killed. Unfortunately for him, and let's hope the rest of the season and the rest of his career, he does not get injured. But it's not getting better. Look, it's miserable there right now. Talking to people in the building, they know that they're in trouble. And people I spoke to there, people that are in power, have shared with the building that they want to see improvement. And this was 2 weeks ago when you and I discussed this. This was 2 weeks ago. They turned the stove on hot. We need to get better now. And it hasn't been better. So let's see what happens. The Panthers got the Titans. This is a team that they should be able to beat. The Titans are not any better than the Panthers. So I think this is a really good opportunity to maybe get on the right track if they want to attempt to save their job. But it may be too far at this point.
Early in the season, it felt like it would be a drastic choice to move on from him after the year, after giving him only 1 year. But based on the way that things have gone over the last few weeks and kind of picking up the breadcrumbs of what it seems like there, it feels like it would be surprising to see him get to the end of the season now. And that's a pretty wild departure from the conversations we were having about this staff as it was being assembled and conversations we were having about the staff as recently as this summer.
Yeah, the biggest coaching staff in football, an expensive one. Frank Reich signed a 4-year deal. He's only a few months into that contract. And David Tepper, if he decides to move on from Frank Reich and fire him, will have to pay his contract out as well, while then getting to the business of looking for another head coach. And this just seems like a carousel that is just spinning and spinning. And I'm also curious, are they going to stick with Bryce Young under center here? Have they maybe considered going to back up Andy Dalton? Is that even an option right now if they want to try to win some games, or they're just going to sit here and let their rookie go?
I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can take the public backlash from making a decision like that. And the money side of this, you can make a very quick comparison. Look at what happened in Denver. Look at how quickly a fast coaching change, a fast hiring goes from being, oh, that's a pretty ugly job. Who would want that? To Sean Payton taking it. Because if you got owners with deep pockets, paying out that one contract and handing out another one to entice somebody to come take that job is a little bit easier. But if I were Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald, some of these guys who are going to be at the top of these lists, I would be a little skeptical and a little hesitant about taking that gig and stepping into that situation based on how everything has gone there and the lack of patience that we've seen here over the last couple of years and how flippant that ownership group seems to be with some of their decision making.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see who they're going to go after. We know that they really wanted to get Ben Johnson the last time around. They'd also met with Sean Payton, right? And so they're seeing what he's doing. And Robert, look, I see the struggles. We all see the struggles in Carolina. You feel for them. They have the number 1 overall pick, and yet the number 2 is lighting this league on fire. You cannot tell me that that is not affecting some of the impatience, the frustration, and I'm sure some of even the decision making. The fact that CJ Stroud is having the type of season. I'm not saying I believe Carolina believes they picked the wrong guy. I actually think they still believe in him. Ownership still believes in him. GM still believes in him. Front office still believes in him. Coaching staff still believes in him. The players believe in Bryce Young. I just think it's really difficult to sit there and watch the number 2 do what he's doing and look like he's been playing for 5 years versus a quarterback who we see is just really just struggling for a lot of different reasons.
It's so tempting in these moments to try to step back and look at it in a cold, calculated way. It's like, oh, it's his first year. It's a new staff. You should probably give him some time. I think it's probably a little unfair to fire someone that quickly and look at this scientifically, when in reality, I think it's really important to remember that the people making these decisions are very, very human. It is about embarrassment. It's about public perception. Think about the timing of the John Robinson firing in Tennessee. You think it's an accident that that happened immediately after A.J. Brown burned down that team and ownership in Tennessee had to watch that happen up close and personal? That can help. That can throw some gasoline on some of these situations. So I think that what C.J. Stroud is doing right now and David Tepper having to watch that every single week, and this guy being one of the new faces of the league, that creates real human guttural reactions from somebody in his position. And I think that can lead to some emotional decision-making here in the short term.
And the only other thing, and this is similar to, we touched on it a little bit with the Steelers, and we mentioned Buffalo and the Jets as well. Coaches are constantly obsessed with making sure their teams don't implode, right? Because that's the only thing that they can try to have control on. Yeah, the preparation and all that, but any head coach that is sweating it, that feels like they're drowning, that's always what they're locked in. I can't lose the locker room. I can't lose these guys, because the second that happened, that's usually the axe.
Let's stick on some hot seats here. Feels like the walls are kind of closing in Los Angeles right now with Brandon Staley and the Chargers. If you heard kind of how defensive he was during that press conference after the game and just the overall feel tone that's kind of looming over that team right now, how hot is the seat that Brandon Staley is sitting on right now in LA?
Yeah, I think there's just a feeling right now in the league that the Chargers are going to probably take a look at this entire few seasons under Staley and make a decision that this is probably not the best for this organization. You know, in this time of year, this is when you start hearing whispers about potential candidates, guys that want to be head coaches. Their agents are working and making phone calls trying to find out, all right, who can I get in on early, right? Which GM can I get, whose attention can I get to say, look, here's what my guy can do, right? Just so it can start. Whether that's legal or not, I'm not too sure, but hopefully it's legal. But with that in mind, you know, I understand why the Chargers have been taking a look at this performance and this coaching staff here. We've seen it all season long. We've seen the struggles. We've seen the decision-making. We've seen the coaching. But with that in mind, this is just conversations outside that building, those that are reflecting on ownership here. There's a lot of people who don't believe that the Spanos will fire their head coach in season, that they may just ride this out with Brandon Staley and then start anew at the end of the season.
Yeah, it feels like that's the MO of this organization. I mean, they don't really do those sorts of splashy moves in any capacity. I will say the one thing that makes it a tiny bit intriguing is that they have somebody in the building that is a pretty natural choice as an interim if they were to move to him. And that's Kellen Moore, who has been in head coaching conversations. And that's going to be one of the fascinating things to monitor with this entire deal. If we believe that Brandon Staley is probably not going to be the coach there next year, is the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers currently in the building right now? And then what happens with the front office, who's had plenty of missteps here over the last couple of years in assembling this roster? So it feels like everything is going to be on the table for this team and the direction they take moving forward.
Yeah. And look, Kellen Moore was a name that the Panthers, they were interested in him as well. He also interviewed for that job, if you recall. And I think it's really to come down to the advantage. Well, it depends on how you look at it. The advantage Kellen Moore has, he's shown what he can do. He's in the building. It's just, does ownership believe that what he's done with Justin Herbert, do they believe that that's good enough? Or can Justin Herbert be better?
It's a totally reasonable question. And I think that how can we get the most out of a roster led by this quarterback playing at this level is the central question that's going to be hanging over that franchise here over the next couple months. One more here before we move on. Washington, Ron Rivera, again, feels like a situation that's heading toward an ending that kind of feels a little bit inevitable. What's the latest on the dynamic between the new ownership in Washington and Ron Rivera, and what the timeline might look like with him either keeping or losing that job?
Yeah, it certainly feels like cemetery row here, right? With all these, because it is that time of year where how we started this conversation, which is ownership is looking, going, all right, this is what we are. We know what this is. It's not getting better. And I'd say of all the ones that we've talked about outside of the Panthers, the Commanders just seem like an organization that is getting set up and ready to make a change based on some of their moves. And really just a lot of conversation around the league over the last few weeks. You know, the rumors even started before the season that this would be it for Rivera, which I think was unfair. But now that there's new ownership with the people that they're going to want to bring in here, I think they were going to let this year play out and then reassess at the end, depending on how they did. But now we kind of know where they stand. So, you know, I could see this organization certainly moving on after Ron Rivera, really 13 years in the league. And you know, he's only had 3 winning seasons.
When no new ownership comes in, and new ownership that is as proactive, as I would say, as this ownership group has been in the other sports where they have ownership stakes, I think what Ron Rivera and that staff had to do to keep that job, they had to blow them away. I mean, they had to make a real case for why they deserve to keep those jobs and why they deserve to stay in power. And that just hasn't happened. You know, even if you think that there have been some bright spots, even if you think that they can attach themselves to Sam Howell and potentially his development moving forward, I think that they were behind the 8 ball. But there was a high bar that they were going to have to clear. And I think no matter how you're looking at it, if you're looking at it with clear eyes, they probably haven't cleared that bar.
Yeah, and ownership always wants their name on it, and Ron Rivera is not there was no connection there. So, look, this is another opportunity that we're going to see. Look, you look at this roster, and I'm sure we're going to do a show about this coming up towards the end of the season or even the off season about, you know, the best head coaching jobs available. I actually think this is one of those sneaky good ones with new ownership, as I can tell you, they are all in on trying to build the biggest brand in football. And if they can just get the right people in the building, they're going to try to hope to turn this around, even though I know Commander fans feel like they've been hearing that for years.
A lot of cap space, a lot of flexibility. I think that there is kind of a blank slate feeling over this organization right now in a good way. And I think the fans probably reflect that. Let's get to a situation where we probably wouldn't throw their brass in the same category post Aaron Rodgers. But based on your reporting, how do the Jets guys feel about their job security based on the way this season has gone so far?
You know, Robert, I always assumed that after we saw Aaron Rodgers get injured, that despite him not being out there, everyone was just going to try to approach this season as, let's give our best effort, but it's a wash. Let's just get Aaron back. We're to keep this thing intact. We're to stay afloat. And yeah, it stinks, but we're just going to wait for the man to get back. And that's not the feeling I'm getting out of New York. Much like Carolina, the staff is nervous. They're concerned. They don't feel as confident as I know they did initially about their job status. And I think a lot of it's because most of them have experience and they know that this isn't good enough. They see the production on the field on both sides of the ball. They see the lack of it. And obviously the losses are mounting, changing of the quarterback. And it's been a lot this year. There has been so much going on surrounding this Jets team. And, you know, with Aaron Rodgers trying to get back, he was just on the Pat McAfee show this afternoon talking about him running on a treadmill. You know, and he didn't give an exact date, but it's obvious he wants everyone to know he's going to try to get back. Now, whether or not the Jets are going to roll him out, they're not even going to be good enough for him to go, you know, to have him come back, you know, depending on how this goes. They got obviously the game on Friday against the Dolphins, but in terms of this overall staff, I don't get a feeling of, hey, we're all right anymore. I get certainly a very nervous building.
Aaron Rodgers may not be back on the field, but his fingers are certainly in some of the choices that that organization might make and how it's being shaped. If you look at what's happening with the offense right now, obviously they make the quarterback change to Tim Boyle, but it's not like the structure of the offense is blowing people away. Nathaniel Hackett, I think in most situations, his job security would be hanging by a thread a little bit, but we know about his connection to Aaron Rodgers and part of the reason that he has that job. So as you're thinking about potential changes in New York, what sort of influence could Aaron Rodgers have, even with the way the staff looks moving forward?
I think all of it. I think it has to be. I think he's the only one in that building who understands what it takes to win. It doesn't mean he has all the answers. I think empowering a player like that is important for their culture and for what they're trying to build, making sure he feels that he's part of all of this. I do think Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh have tried to keep a defined divide in we're the coach, we're the GM, you're the player, yet we're open to your thoughts. And they're going to keep that up. And we can debate this, but I would argue it's probably smart of them to keep him happy. He hasn't always been the easiest person to deal with. Talk to people in Green Bay. So I think the decisions that were made before Aaron joined the New York Jets were shaped and molded into making sure that everything was set to look the way he wanted to. He wanted it to look, so he'd come to New York. Then he got to New York, and that culture was set. That it was immediately made. We're going to make sure everything keeps Aaron Rodgers happy. And I'm curious to see how happy he is right now with the state of this team, with this coaching staff. If this is who he wants to continue leading him. Is he so disappointed in some of this roster? Is he so disappointed in this play that he'd be willing to speak up to someone like Woody Johnson and say, I think we should get a new GM, a new head coach? Could you imagine that? And if you're the owner, you're going, I'll probably listen to you.
Whatever happens, whatever changes are made, I think it's worth keeping in mind that Aaron Rodgers may have a hand in what those changes look like. So when you see either the staff stay intact after the season ends, if you see some changes at certain positions, just keeping that in the back of your mind and thinking about who's pulling some of those strings, probably worth hanging on to as we think about the Jets and their future. We'll see what the next stage of the Jets looks like with Tim Boyle taking over. Feels like way too little, way too late when you consider some of the moves that a team like Minnesota made. If you were going to make this move at quarterback post week 11, why not try to do something before the trade deadline? If it was only going to be 2 or 3 weeks that you were willing to hang on to kind of the last gasps of the Zach Wilson era.
I know for our loyal viewers here that hang with us for 30 minutes, we try to keep this thing tight, but I feel like we could have done a whole show just on the Jets this season. And maybe we do that at some point here because they really do have so many storylines. And, I think they're going to look back on this season and we don't know for a fact, or at least I don't know for a fact, why they never made a move at the quarterback position, except for the fact that they really believed that Zach was giving them their best bet because he had been around Aaron, because they were comfortable with him, his understanding of what they were looking for, his relationship that he built with Nathaniel Hackett. But as you point out too, if someone like Josh Dobbs can step in after getting off the plane 4 days before a game and be just completely fine, I think we're trying to make this a lot harder than it maybe needs to be.
Last thing we wanted to hit here, The Athletic released an anonymous player poll today on The Athletic, just tackling a bunch of different issues, asking players around the league about certain topics. 2 that I really wanted to dig into. One that I just not shocked by the results, but I thought they were so notable, especially when you contrast that some of the criticisms that we had about him earlier in the show. Players asked who the coach that they would most want to play for. And if you look at the percentages and the number of votes, Mike Tomlin got 19 of the votes, which accounted for more than a quarter of the player responses, that Mike Tomlin is the coach that these guys would want to play for. What do you think that says about not only Tomlin, but again, about some of the appeal and just some of that power that he has, even when some of the other decision-making and some of the other kind of organizational things with the Steelers have fallen a little bit short in recent years?
I think there's value in consistency. There's obviously value in never having a losing season, right? I think players are obviously aware of that. And, we touched on it before, just the type of balance that he has in terms of connecting with players and understanding and empathy, sympathy. just the way he is behind the scenes with his guys, the kind of conversations he has. I love watching him in the locker room after a game. He always goes in there and talks to his players and has, just individual conversations with them, whether it's about a play and he might as well just put a uniform on. He looks like one of the guys, the way he's connecting with them and talking, and the respect that he garners from his players is tremendous. And you feel it. You think just because the title that it's automatic. It's not. I've been in enough locker rooms with coaches, and it's just like, I can't even tell you who the coach is because you can't feel it. You feel when Mike Tomlin's around. And I think that one not small, but significant characteristic about him that I don't hear a lot about in the media, but I know from talking to players like Minka Fitzpatrick shared with me once a great story about the adjustments that Tomlin was making at halftime after they're playing the Browns once. And he's like, he's so smart. He's such a smart guy. We never say smart with Mike Tomlin because he's so good at everything. I think we kind of gloss over that, but obviously you have to be a pretty damn intelligent person to be in that role and to have success.
Everything that I've heard about him is that his football mind is just so well-rounded, so curious. Even talking to people that worked in analytics departments for them in the past, and just his role and how some of those projects that they worked on, the things they sought out. So none of that is surprising. And I think, again, this is important to consider all of the different roles a head coach plays. I think that they really struggle to find the right plan with their offensive coordinator the last few years. That doesn't mean that Mike Tomlin isn't an incredible culture setter, isn't an incredible motivator, isn't the type of person that gets the most out of individual players within that building because of the way that he has shaped the direction of that building. Being a head coach is a multifaceted job. And there are some people who are great in some areas and maybe fall a little bit short in others. And I think that there are so many ways that even as they've struggled to kind of get some of the details right in some specific areas, that team and that building is consistently pointed in the right direction because of everything that he sets and puts into place. And I think that's probably well understood with players around the league who've kind of appreciated the job that he has done for so long.
I also thought it was interesting. So obviously a Super Bowl winning coach is number one. And number two was Mike McDaniels, right? Right. And look, I have all the respect in the world for coaching. I think he's doing such a great job. Obviously what he's done with Tua and his offense, but I think that's a result of just phenomenal moments that he has been captured participating in, that players see. He's funny, he's quirky, he's strange, he's entertaining, but he gets it. And he has, it doesn't matter if you're cool, if you're, if you're a big guy like a Dan Campbell or you're a dork like Mike, and I think he'd be okay with me saying that. If you can connect, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and he clearly can, and he's done a heck of a job kind of building his own personal brand down there. I think a lot of people have attached themselves to it. The other kind of set of answers I wanted to talk about before we move on here. Players asked about turf versus grass fields. One of the questions posed to all the players was, what is the biggest issue facing the league right now? The second most popular answer is what's happening with turf fields in the NFL. And then asked specifically whether or not they think that the turf versus grass debate is overblown or it's a real concern. 83% of the players who responded says this was a real concern that the NFL has to think about. You've done some reporting on this issue. What do you think the conversation is going to look like moving forward around this debate, considering how the players clearly feel about it?
Well, first of all, you don't get a response from a player that, they're very decisive about this. I was in the locker room at MetLife Stadium after Aaron Rodgers tore his his Achilles. And that conversation was obviously being had at that point. And every Jets player, even though we were emotional, they'd just come off a great win, they all wanted to talk about it. And they gave some great answers as to why they want to play on grass. And a lot of them really believe that so many injuries could be prevented. Okay, so then why hasn't that happened? Why isn't every stadium grass? From what I can gather from talking to owners, from talking to people that make these kind of decisions, it comes down to money. And a lot of these owners want their stadiums to be not just available for football games, but for concerts, for music festivals, like you see at MetLife Stadium. I live right near it. It's constantly busy with things that are happening, and that way they can make money off it. So look, I don't think that's the answer for every owner. I don't want to speak for the entire league, but I know that's a really big factor as to why they don't want to go from turf to grass at this point, which I would like your opinion as to why you think that maybe isn't the greatest decision.
I think if you consider how much money Aaron Rodgers potentially was worth to the New York Jets this season, it's a little bit of a short-sighted cash grab in some of these very specific moments. So I don't think this is going away. I think this is going to be a continued discussion. I think the players are going to be vocal about it, and we'll see where the dust settles when that discussion ends here over the next few months. Dianna Russini, thank you very much for spending some extended time with us during a holiday week. We'll be back here next week. Enjoy your Thanksgiving with your family. It's always great to see you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. That was a Fat Tuesday.